I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Hotel Mars. Episode N. David Livingston, my colleague and co-host and co-pilot, because we're off to Mars to build a colony on the surface and then underground. I almost said subterranean, David, but that's inappropriate. Do you have a term on the space show for building underneath a planet that is not Earth?
Underground or below the soil?
Below the soil. Submartian doesn't ring, but we'll get to it in time. And we welcome a colleague of ours, professor from Rutgers University, Haym Benaroya, who has written Dust to Gold, a book about colonies on the moon, and suggestively in his Colonies on the Moon was all the material to train for a colony on Mars. So, Professor, we're going to rush ahead for reasons to do with recent discoveries, and you know them very well, so I'll recite them because David and I have talked to people on this show about them. One, Curiosity, the rover in Gale Crater, several weeks ago reported asymmetrical and periodic methane traces in the atmosphere. Methane is consistent with perhaps volcanology and perhaps organics, perhaps unexplained. But in any event, methane is suggestive of organics at some point. Also, we have most recently evidence of nitrogen in the soil, not dead soil, nitrogen in the soil that is consistent, I'm told, Professor, with enrichment. And then three, the oceans of Mars, where are they? In the first billion years, and they're not there now. Perhaps some of it's underground. How does that suit, Haym? Are those the conditions that are suggestive that we can go underground in Mars and build a successful colony that's shielded? Good evening to you.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Certainly, a lot of the elements that we found on Mars and what you just described would be conducive for us to build a colony on Mars, and people have always maintained that in order to protect humans, we would eventually have to go underground, whether Moon or Mars, but underground is a safe haven for human beings.
And going underground, is this because you have imagined and presented the case for moon colony? First, there are the landers that are put together as a complex, and then there is the sub-lunar. Is that all conceivable to you to work on Mars just as well as the moon?
Generally, yes. A lot of the components of Mars and Moon are very similar. Mars is obviously a lot further out, so there are other issues regarding sunlight and things like that, but the basic technologies that would work on the moon would also work on Mars as well.
David?
Good evening, Haym. How different would your engineering be of an underground Martian habitat versus an underground lunar habitat? Would they be significantly different or just on the margins?
There could be significant difference primarily because of the gravitational difference. So one of the things we know on Earth is a lot of the construction equipment depends on gravity in order to be able to dislodge the soil. On the moon, that wouldn't work because of the 1/6 gravity. Now on Mars, you have about 40% of Earth gravity, about twice as much as on the moon. So some of the technology that we would use on Mars could take advantage of that higher gravity.
And Mars is suggestive of having lots of minerals, Maybe the moon does too. Recently, I had a conversation with a scientist, a geologist, who's working on Opportunity, which, thank you very much, is doing very well, 11 years in, past the marathon distance. And Opportunity has found what is called Marathon Valley. It's an exit from the crater that they're working, the ridge of the crater. And they believe on the surface they're seeing shiny metals that are consistent with aluminum, for example, and other complex metal molecules. None of this is established, but it's observed right now. That tells me that Mars has the raw material for manufacturing. Is that credible for what we know about Mars? And is that something that we can conceive of using in a Mars base so that we don't have to transport everything up and down to Mars?
That's absolutely true. So if you run down the elements that you find that are estimated on Mars, the largest amount is oxygen, about 40%, then silicon, about 20%, iron, potassium, calcium, magnesium, sulfur, aluminum. So all these are really industrial materials. They could be used to build structures. one of the advantages of being in a low-gravity environment is you don't necessarily have to build from the strongest steels. For example, we did a study on using magnesium as a building material for the moon, and that would be equally applicable to Mars as well.
David?
Haym, would it be at all efficient and effective to use Martian resources and materials to build habitats on the surface of Mars and not go underground?
Well, I guess it depends what generation lunar base we're talking about. If we're talking maybe third generation lunar base, so first generation would be the modules that we would transport there. Second generation would be surface, and third generation would be underground. So, in principle, yes, but that's not going to be the first way that we're going to do it.
Let's go underground, because the conditions on Mars, the thin atmosphere and the events that you have to deal with on the surface, including, I believe, really unacceptable amount of ultraviolet and sunlight, very strong rays on the surface. Going underground is a sustainable fashion, or is that speculation, Haym?
I think it's every belief that we will eventually build underground on Mars, on the moon as well. Probably 80-90%, almost like iceberg fashion, where most of it is underground, and we have basically portals above.
And underground, we're speculating about water. That's the gold underground, isn't it, Haym? If we find liquid water or ice water that we can reduce to liquid, that means that mankind can thrive.
Absolutely. Water is probably the most important element that we can find on any planetary body.
David?
Haym, if we had the transportation and we were leaving for Mars tomorrow, do we have the technology and the know-how to build underground in 9 months when we get there? No,
definitely not. No, I think we barely would have the technology to bring people to Mars. I mean, we know from historical data that 50% of all the spacecraft that we sent to Mars didn't get there. So that's not a very good record. I would say that the best we could do with Mars is what we've done so far today, is basically send robotic missions and then do a lot of testing, make sure we know what's there, and perhaps select a very suitable site for a future mission, just like we've done with the moon.
Let's talk about robots then. Robots for the first generation of building, second generation of building. Can we build underground robotically?
Not today. Even on Earth, where we have all the resources we need, we still have basically manned control of all these digging machines. Everything is basically built by people.
So we can't, at this point, put together a rover or a robotics team that can duplicate what a man could do or mankind could do present using the same machinery.
That's right. We cannot.
And give me a timeline, Haym. You sit around and speculate about this all the time. 50 years, 20 years, what do we need? It's digital. It's a digital universe. How soon?
Well, I would say if we put it in the framework of Moon Mars, if we started today, we could probably be on the moon in 15 years, a serious effort. And then from the moon, I would say another 10 to 15 years for Mars, with basically surface structures, maybe the beginnings of digging underground, probably on the moon first. But the moon is very dense, extremely difficult to dig on the moon. Mars is probably a little bit easier.
Mars is, and how about, David, we've seen evidence on the surface of caves in the moon and caves on Mars.
Absolutely, plus lava tubes and other things that might make it a little bit easier.
That's attractive, Haym, though David is correct to mention lava tubes. I remember I saw them recently on the surface, an old volcano, which looks like access right there.
Yes, and the lava tubes are probably the way we would initially go underground, basically going into them, shoring them up structurally, and then perhaps sealing them and pressurizing them and getting this large volume underground and getting all the benefits that you mentioned earlier.
David, we're three guys in a hurry, aren't we?
Absolutely. Definitely.
We don't want to wait, but we're ambitious enough to believe that somewhere listening to us right now is someone who can do this. Maybe young, maybe this person will know the person who does it, but somewhere within, Haym gives us 15 and 15, that looks mid-century, so I'll give it a margin of another 30. What do you think, Haym? 2075?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I would say that the people who are going to do this are already perhaps into their teen years.
Haym Benaroya, his book is Turning Dust to Gold, Building a Future on the Moon and Mars. David Livingston, Dr. Space of the Space Show, Hotel Mars, Episode N.